Good morning, everyone. So this is September 30th, 2022. My name is Liz Braden, District Councillor for District 9. I am the temporary chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Redistricting. I am joined by my colleagues this morning, Councillor Murphy, Councillor Flaherty, Councillor Bach and Councillor Lara. Chair. Councillor Baker. This working session is being recorded and is live streamed on boston.gov/citycouncil-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, FiOS Channel 964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.redistricting@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councillors. Since this is a working session, there will not be any public opportunities for public comment at this time. Today's working session is on Docket 1098, Order for the Adoption of the City Council Redistricting Principles. Thank you, everyone. Councillor Mejia has joined us. So this morning, one thing I want to start off with is a reminder that all our deliberations with regard to redistricting are subject to open meeting law. I want us to all be cognizant of that fact. For those listening, my colleagues, we've had 3 working sessions in the past 3 weeks, and what we've worked on is the issue of when we re-precincted, we added 20 new precincts to the city, increasing from 155 to 275 to 275. And 16 of those precincts were split precincts that had to be allocated to one district. And in those working sessions, we have worked on those, and we reached consensus that we would place those split precincts in a district, and that is the basis of our conversation, based on what we call a baseline map that placed those split precincts in districts temporarily, just as a basis for conversation on drawing a new map. So yesterday we had a very well-attended public hearing. The intention of the committee chair and the vice chair in leading this process was to get as much community input as possible before the committee drew its map. And we've been reaching out to community advocates. We're trying to go out and attend community meetings, and we had a well-attended public hearing yesterday. The consensus and the feedback they got from the public meeting was the need for increased community engagement to ensure that the process was transparent and inclusive. And the understanding is that we appreciate the fact that we need to engage further with our communities, but we also plan on having further listening sessions and further working sessions that are open and accessible. All of our working sessions are open and accessible to the public. At this point, I would... Councillor Flynn has joined us. Thank you. At this point, I would... ask my colleagues if anyone has any comments on the process so far and any insights into the feedback that we got from our community hearing yesterday. Councillor Baker. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank you again for your stewardship. I think that you and Brian are doing a great job. There was just one thing that was said yesterday that I wanted to address here today. Former Senator
Wilkinson said, first of all, she said that I think, well, I won't even get into that, but she made an accusation that white counselors were meeting. That's almost an accusation of open meeting law, and it's a pretty serious accusation. And I think it was leveled at, obviously, I'm one of the white counselors here. I know open meeting law, and I know I haven't been violating it. I just want to be on the record here that I think we ought to have some sort of discussion about what open meeting law looks, maybe not in this hearing here, but what open meeting law looks like. Like, you're not allowed to call and whip votes, that sort of stuff. You're not allowed to go into one person's office as a group of counselors and discuss this. You're not allowed to go to dinner as a group of counselors and discuss this. You can't be texting about it throughout the day. There's a whole lot of ways that there could be open meeting law violations, and I just wanted to get that on record, that was a pretty serious charge that was made here yesterday, and totally unfounded. So just at some point, I think maybe we should have a quick discussion on what open meeting law in terms of redistricting means. Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you for your stewardship in this process. It's refreshing.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. I just before you came into the room, I did remind our colleagues that all of our deliberations are subject to open meeting law, and I think it might be helpful to review that and give everybody information to just get everybody up to speed on all of the implications of that. Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Flaherty.
Madam Chair, I do not have the benefit of being here due to a previous scheduling conflict, but I will say, obviously, that if there was anyone here casting aspersions towards this process, particularly your stewardship as the chair, they're not in good faith. We all know you. We know how hard you're working, both you and Brian as the vice chair. We know your character. We know your work ethic. We know your integrity. And we know that any of those types of accusations is just something that's just not part of who you are as a district council or as a colleague. And all of our colleagues should be standing up when folks are casting those aspersions. If they did, I did not have the benefit of being here. I will review the tape, but I can speak to that, obviously, personally as an at-large councillor, and since you've joined this body, forget just your stewardship and chairmanship of this committee, but you've been an absolute pleasure to work with. You are a two-way street. You roll up the sleeves, you find common ground. We're not always, you and I either, personally, we're not going to agree 1,000% of the time, but we always find a way to try to work together, because it isn't about us. It's about the people we serve. It's about our constituents. It's about the neighborhoods in the communities of Boston. And so I just want to go on the record and say that from the time that I met you and started working with you, and now even as chair, you call it as you see it, you play it straight up the middle, and there's no sort of skullduggery or shenanigans anywhere near this process. You are taking this role very seriously. You are listening to everybody, and you're being as inclusive and cooperative and professional as I've ever seen a chair in my 20 years here in the Boston City Council. So again, I did not attend yesterday, so I wasn't aware of any type of aspersions, but if they were casting them, I can tell the people of Boston that they were not in good faith. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak briefly, and wanted to echo what my colleague, Councillor Flaherty, mentioned, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, the professionalism and leadership of you and Councillor Worrell as well has been exceptional. So I wanted to put that on the record again. And then the second point I just want to make, Madam Chair, is I'm going to, in a few minutes, I'm going to reach out to the City Council staff director, and I'm going to see about getting a discussion, maybe chaired by the clerk, a meeting, maybe a meeting in the rules about exactly open meeting law, what it does, what it doesn't do, what impact it has, what type of violations potentially could take place. So I could coordinate that through my role as chairman of the rules and set something up maybe shortly over the next week, just so everyone is familiar with the open meeting laws. So that would just be a general discussion, nothing really to do with redistricting, but just a general discussion on exactly what the open meeting law is all about. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. That would be very helpful. Anyone else? Councillor Murphy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo that last night's meeting, yesterday afternoon, it seemed like night, was a great opportunity to hear from the public. I really appreciated the Chinatown community who came in and their translator who helped support them, make sure that they were clearly letting us know what they need, what they want, what they hope to see through this process. So it was great to hear directly from them. But I do just want to go on record to thank you for your leadership here, stepping into this role. But also, I know Wayne and Pam and others in your office have taken this on, and I appreciate that also, because there were other things going on in District 9 I know that you were already very busy with, so thank you for that. And I look forward to continuing these meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and I just want to say thank you for bringing us into the Ionella Chamber and creating space for this transparent process so folks at their leisure can rewind the tape and listen and learn and go alongside us. So just thank you for honoring community voice on that space. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think yesterday's public meeting was very, very helpful, and we got a lot of really good feedback from the community and lots to think about. Obviously, not all the voices were in the room yesterday. We have some more work to do to reach out to other communities of interest to have their voices heard as we continue this process. So really, I know that several of my colleagues have proposed, have thoughts and proposed maps to be considered in our conversation about the redistricting. The intent of the committee is to take community input and councillors' input and to develop, as I said earlier, to develop an inclusive map that will reflects all of the work that has been done so far and reflects the feedback that we're getting from communities across the city. One thing that was striking from yesterday's conversation was that there was a very clear message from the Chinese community in the South End of a desire to stay together as in District 2 with the Chinatown. They've spent many decades building their political voice and their political power, and they feel that to splinter them off from the Chinatown community would be a retrograde step in weakening their voice. We also heard loud and clear from the folks in the Roxbury community that there was a desire to keep Roxbury whole, and also to maintain or strengthen our majority-minority districts. So there is very valuable information that came in yesterday, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. We had a lot of other letters and comments were sent in via email, as well as those who were able to participate in person or on video, by video link on Zoom. Anyone else of my councillors like to have any comments? Councillor Arroyo?
Yes, I just want to make sure. We also, since we're doing a quick breakdown, also acknowledge Mr. Fox, who has raised that the South End has been divided amongst different districts for a long time, and he wanted to see the district unified as well in the South End. So I just want to make sure we raise that as well, that there are diverse viewpoints around the South End.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bach?
Yeah, I just wanted to add as an addendum that a thing that I hadn't focused on and was sort of embarrassed not to have focused on, because I used to work at the Housing Authority, was the fact that Torre Unidad is also in the Via Victoria precinct. I think just flagging that as something we'd been we've been talking about the Via Victoria 9-1 precinct and the Cathedral 8-1 precinct, and when people were testifying last night, it reminded me that Torre Unidad, which is a significant senior housing development in the BHA, is also in 9-1. So that was just a concrete flag.
Thank you. Everyone should have a handout of all the district summary reports. This is when we incorporated the split district. This is sort of the baseline from where we're starting. I think one issue that we recognise is that there's been an incredible amount of development in and around the downtown area that has caused a really burgeoning population, especially in District 2. And in that particular, it's the South Boston waterfront has added a lot of population, but there's a lot of other development across the city core. And it is putting a lot of pressure on us to come up with solutions to equally divide the districts as we're required to do by law. Inevitably, we will see. Inevitably, we'll end up with a redistricting map that is not. It's hard to keep everybody happy. So we're really working to try and build consensus across our committee and in engagement with the community to find a way forward to draw a map that is fair and representative. So at this moment, I know Councillor Murphy, Councillor Arroyo, you have proposals in the works that have been presented, brought to that haven't been formally discussed in our committee yet. But Councillor Arroyo, would you like to just give us a brief summary of what it is that you're seeking, your proposal, and then Councillor Murphy, I'll give you an opportunity to bring yours in as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So our map does a few things. The reality is the population shift has largely taken place in downtown and in the South Boston area. And when you look at the map as it's currently constructed and try to actually create one and go through the precincts, precinct by precinct, you figure out there's a pretty quick cascading impact. In other words, if you took the map and didn't do what we did in ours, which is unify the South End in that way, you would have to divide the South End again between 3 different districts. And when you do that, because of the population numbers, you have to cut into and actually split other districts, other precincts. And so in other words, if you were to not just unify the South End the way that my map tries to do here, you would end up having to split South Boston, or you would have to end up splitting South Boston and possibly going all the way up into Roxbury. There was a cascading impact based on the fact that Councillor Bach's district is essentially at capacity. Councillor Coletta's district is essentially at capacity. And when you get into those precincts up at the top there in South End, you can't just hand them off to those districts. So you either have to give them to District 7 or you have to give them to District 3, or you could keep them with District 2 and increase the number in District 2, but doing so actually requires District 3 to then grow into different neighborhoods, either South Boston more, or has to go into a combination of multiple neighborhoods, which actually, when you get into it, makes them less whole. And so the goal here was to do the least amount of disruption as possible and to do what we could to unify as many neighborhoods as possible. And so this would give the South End its own sort of map. It essentially makes it a South End Dorchester seat instead of a South End Dorchester South Boston seat. It makes South Boston whole because it gives the McCormick projects back. It keeps 1 and 9 almost identical. In 8, it does something very similar. I believe in our map 310 is given to Councillor Coletta's district, District 1. District 6 is largely identical except for the changing of 28 and 21 to further unify Rosendale as is done on this map. 18-7 1912, which have pieces of Rosendale, end up in this district, but to make sure that the demographic numbers stay true to what they were in the past, 14.8 and 14.14 are held by District 5, and 14.5 and 18.2 to better unify along Mass Ave go into District 4. We also include Lower Mills and Cedar Grove in District 4. I know Cedar Grove has raised some concerns about that, but Brandy Fluker Oakley's district also, who is a state rep who just went through the redistricting process, solely has 1611, and so we don't believe that splitting it keeps Dorchester seats, which really we have 2 Dorchester seats here, which is District 3 and District 4, as it stands right now. They both remain Dorchester dominant seats on this map. And so the idea here is to create the least amount of disruption. I think one of the things we've heard quite a bit is the separation of Via Victoria, specifically from District 2. And I think what we're aiming for on this map is the idea of creating a district in District 3 that gets up to 18% AAPI, which makes it a dominant percentage of the population in that district being District 3 under this map. It includes the connection of the LGBTQ plus communities in the South End with those communities in Dorchester. And it makes sure that if you go look at the numbers on our map compared to where the maps are now, it actually almost maintains exactly the racial demographics from every district as best as I think any map will be able to do from then, even with the recent census data showing that we've had something like 3.5 or close to 4% of the black population leave Boston. And so it does a lot of work to ensure that, for instance, District 7, which I think is at like 35.1% black right now, stays at about 35.4% black. And that District 4 stays around 50%, and the number there in terms of total people of color does not change substantially in any way, shape, or form from the past. There are obviously other variations of how you could do this map, but every single one of those variations requires South End to be split into multiple precincts and pieces. And then if you do that, you've essentially broken up that community's ability to be one whole neighborhood. And to do that, you end up going into, as I said, other neighborhoods and actually splitting up different constituencies that way. And so for me, I recognize that some may look at this map and think that it's somehow complicated, but I think you know, because you've been working on the baseline map, that it actually gets more complicated if you split up the South End and don't just do it this way. I'm happy to take questions or discuss it, but I don't want to just keep going on it. So I think that pretty much gives an overview of it.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo.
One quick thing. I would just say that the deviation on this map is 2.5%. So we end up with almost nearly identical districts as we should be aiming to do.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. Let me see, remind me. Councillor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just through the chair to the previous speaker, can I get a copy of that map, or do we have copies of them? Very good.
The answer is yes.
So, and then maybe Shane, through the chair, maybe Shane could just have them copied or distributed, just so we know what he's referring to when he's talking about his map.
Thank you.
Thank you. Or a smaller version of.
I'd also like to say to colleagues, if you're
what's on your desk?
Presenting maps, please work with Shane on the getting the maps before the body, so that we have a clear understanding of what's out there. So I'm cognizant of the time that there's another event happening in the next about 20-25 minutes. So I'm going to move on. Councillor Flaherty.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, no, I just want to get a copy of the map. That's all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Murphy has agreed to have his staff print the smaller version with color. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Murphy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And similar to what Councillor Flaherty asked, if through the chair, if we could also get the racial demographic breakdown for each new district.
Yeah, all of those things will be required. Yes, we need to get that.
Thank you. And I can speak on the map that I had proposed First question, just to put it out on the floor, what is the proper way to bring this proposal to the floor? I know when we spoke, I thought the best way would be to share with colleagues and then ask at one of these working sessions. I know that Councilor Fernandez-Anderson and Arroyo filed it as a council hearing.
I think in
So
days
if you-
past, there's been several ways to do it. Councillor Arroyo and Councillor Fernandez-Anderson filed it as an ordinance. In days past, councillors brought maps to the committee for discussion and consideration, and I think I think that's the way I'd like to go, with this collaborative conversation among
Absolutely.
colleagues.
Right, that's
So,
what I proposed this way.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
So yesterday, for those who were at the working session, which most of us were, I did hand out a printout of each district, had the overview summary and the racial demographic breakdown, and also emailed it to everyone so you could have a look at each map. A few things I just want to touch on, and this is in general for any map that gets finalized or discussed. There's lots of different communities of interest, there's lots of different neighborhoods, and what I hear a lot as an at-large counselor is that there's communities that are hoping to come together or stay together. They want to be reunited because maybe 10 years ago or never, they've never been united. But the way, populations and communities have grown, they feel like they're separated by their city council districts. But I mentioned it at a previous meeting that there are some neighborhoods who actually prefer that they are represented by two separate city councilors. They feel like they have more representation. Lower Mills is an example of that. They know that half of the neighborhood is Councilor Worrell, the other half is Councilor Baker. They can call on either one for support. And I do have a question about when Councilor Arroyo's map that he's proposing, he's unifying communities that he chose to unify, and which communities are going to be broken up, because ultimately we know, and you mentioned this earlier, not every neighborhood, not every community is going to be able to either be reunited or stay together. Doesn't mean they're not going to be represented. And when we reference state reps, a state rep has half the population that a city councilor has. So in the neighborhood of Dorchester, which is the largest borough in the United States, the largest neighborhood within a city, it's very big, and we have 2 district councilors who cover most of all of that there are 4 state reps within that place. So to compare state reps to city councilors or senators to state reps, because a senator, has 4 times as big of a population also. So I just want to make sure that when we reference Brandy Fluker Oakley's state rep map, that it isn't the same as a city council map. But wondering, what do we gain by breaking up the communities that were broken up? And if through the chair to Councilor Arroyo, if he could explain which communities of interest he did have to break up to unify the ones he did unify.
Councillor Arroyo, would you like to
Sure.
weigh in on that question?
So first, in reference to the state rep seat, the reason I bring it up is because 1611, which is Cedar Grove, had mentioned the idea that somehow they were being splintered off in some way, shape, or form that was abnormal, and they raised the Senate seat. And I just want to be clear that the Senate seat that they were being splintered off into that they had an issue with was Walter Timilty's seat, which was largely a suburban district. It actually covered Milton more so than any Boston precincts. However, the reason I brought up 1611 is because with the rep seat, 1611 it's the only precinct in that area that is in the 16s that is actually in Rep. Fluker Oakley's district. And what that tells me is that having 1611 and 1713 in the other Dorchester seat, which is District 4, is actually appropriate. I don't think it's a splintering to have that into District 4. I think it's appropriate to do it that way. When we talk about the splintering of communities of interest, I think the only one that has been sort of dominant, and I think that it's a legitimate concern, is the Chinatown community with the residents that they represent as well in Via Victoria. Largely the CPA has done really good work representing the Chinese community throughout the city of Boston. And so you end up with Via Victoria there. The issue that I have found is that if you take those precincts, the cathedral precinct should go with the Via Victoria precinct. If you do that, you end up with some population imbalances that don't necessarily make the most sense to do unless you're going to continue to give Ed Flynn more of the South End, which is clearly a way in which the council could go. But if you do that, that requires going further into South Boston for District 3 and likely, due to the population, into District 4 or District 7. And so you end up with more push one way or the other. And so I think the most prominent community that we have heard from is the Chinese community and the Asian community in the South End. But I also believe that raising the Asian population in District 3 from 15 to 18%, the AAPI, though from different cultures and different countries, does do a lot to ensure that District 3 will continue to represent the Asian population well, and that particular population well, but it also unifies the South End in a way that it has not been unified.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
Councilor Roy. One other thing, so I live in District 3, and the area that you would break up has physical boundaries also. We have Cedar Grove Cemetery, Neponset River, Galvin Boulevard. That area is very together and in one piece. And in my target deviation, the only one a little bit over 2.01 would be Councilor Box District. There were a few neighborhoods there that just seemed naturally to stay together. And District 3 has always been, and also includes 16-1 to make sure that the Vietnamese community, which has for a long time wanted to make sure their whole neighborhood up Dot Ave there in the Little Saigon district is united, which it does do. And the breakdown, which I shared with everyone, the racial demographics, District 3 is 39% white, 18.57% black, 15.9% Hispanic, 16.03 Asian, and then there's 3 other and 7.3 who identified as 2 or more races. So it is very diverse. And I appreciate that, and I mentioned it earlier, that the Asian community did come out about Chinatown in the South End. But I do think if we had a community meeting where we asked District 3, specifically the Adams Corner, Neponset neighborhood, if they wanted to be split by their district councilor, that, because a district councilor is a very different role than a state rep. A district councilor is more in the community, constituent services, not state rep legislative issues. And not to say that state reps don't do a lot of great work in our communities, but we know as at-large, the 3 at-large councilors here, we have all 9 districts, but the district councilors do a lot of in the neighborhoods, at the community meetings, at the parks, at the schools, and they really do. They're one neighborhood. They've always been one neighborhood. It's like if you cut the port off, they would again feel like they were left on an island alone. So that being said, I hope that people continue to look at the map I proposed. I made sure that I included visual maps of each district, demographic, target summary, and if anyone has any questions, I know in the interest of time that will continue this conversation. But thank you for letting me bring this forward, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. And I want to reiterate that this is part of the process. We are colleagues. We're working together collaboratively to come to consensus. Everybody's proposal has good points, and then there's other more difficult issues that we have to sort out and have a debate about and figure out. So, you know, I thank you all for participating in good faith in this process. Councillor Baker, we haven't heard from you yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple comments on the Arroyo Anderson map. I don't think it passed muster in terms of the packing that's happening in Upham's Corner. They're trying to pack all of the Cape Verdean community into District 7. We're looking to reunite, well, we heard we're looking to reunite Roxbury, but we're going after Dorchester precincts. It doesn't really jive. And the term gerrymandering has been thrown around quite a bit here. Gerrymandering can also be used to hurt a district. This here, I mean, if you look at it and you don't think that that's gerrymandering, I don't know what would be gerrymandering. This, to me, with packing, with gerrymandering, I don't think, I would hope that if this passed, that this mayor would, based on just those two things, veto it. And I like Council Murphy's map.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will, just like to say that, in this process, as we come up with proposals, we will seek some expert analysis and look at our proposed maps so that we get some external feedback on the compactness, all of these issues that we have to consider in relation to the Voting Rights Act, so that a map that we will put forward, the ultimate map will be successful and pass muster.
Thank you.
Councillor Bach.
Can I just make a point? Are we going to be able to go to the flag raising, or what should we do?
I'm looking at the time. Is it 10 o'clock? 11
It's
o'clock?
11. Well, it's 10 of 11 now. That's supposed to start at 11.
I will recess and bring you back. So we could recess
Okay.
for half an hour. Would that
Thank
work?
you.
Or 45 minutes? I don't know how long a flag raising takes these days.
Can I just,
Councillor Bach.
can I just make a short comment and then you can recess?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to make it so it could be on the table for further discussion afterwards. My question, Councillor Arroyo, on your map is that it seems as though part of the reason why, from the numbers perspective, the 3 has to reach so far into the south end is because of that substantial bite that you're taking out of 3 for 7. And I wondered if we could talk more specifically about that. So it's I'm trying to compare, and I think it's like precincts 15-1, 13-5, 7-10, and 8-5, all coming out of District 3 and going into District 7. And it does seem to councillors, sorry?
In the interest of time, we'll take the question and we'll...
Yeah, so then I'm happy to, maybe the correlation of the precincts to this smaller map I'm messing up on. Yeah, so I guess my question is, it is true to Councillor Baker's point that all 3 of those are on the Dorchester side of the neighborhood lines that the city draws. And when we were discussing the Cape Verdean community on our working sessions, I think in Ward 15, it came up that they were basically all already in 3, and obviously shifting just 5-15-1 over wouldn't do that. So I'm trying to understand that piece, because it does seem to me like making D3 thin in that part is part of what's driving it over to the north as far, and then and just I think to justify that, we would need like pretty specific numbers on the community of interest that we were trying to unite there. So I just wanted to flag that as a place. I think we've talked a fair bit about the Chinatown South End thing, and obviously Councillor Murphy raised the point about Cedar Grove, but I feel like we haven't talked as much about the details of the precincts and that 3 to 7 flip. So just wanted to flag that for future discussion.
Thank you. We'll come back. Councillor Lara, and then we're going to go to recess for the flag raising.
Thank you, Chair. I actually wanted to make a comment about the question that was just asked similarly about Cedar Groves. Should I do that now or wait until after?
Yeah, we can bring that back later. So this hearing is recessed for what, half an hour? 10:45. No, sorry, I'm an hour behind myself. 11:45. We'll reconvene at 11:45. Thank you. Continue the conversation for another 30 minutes or so, and then adjourn for this session. I encourage our colleagues to engage with the presentations, the maps, the material that's on the table right now. Come with constructive feedback and questions, and hopefully we'll just continue this conversation and get to a good result. We will pick up where we left. There was a question on the table from Councillor Bach about the District 3 movement of precincts from District 3 to District 7, in particular in the Ward 15 area. I don't know, is that correct? Would you like to pick up that question, Councillor Bach?
Yeah, I know, I was just waiting for the mic. So yeah, just, they're actually split, the ones that are moved over are split across 3 wards, I think. It's 1501, 1305, 710, and then I think 85 is one of the ones that's split between the 2 right now. But so it's really those 3, 710, 1305, 1501. I was just saying that since those are currently in Dorchester, from a neighborhood perspective, and I know we were talking about there being a collection of population in 15, but the rest of it's all over in 3. I was wondering about kind of the rationale there, and you know, and I think for the, you know, another consideration that we're all, I think, keeping in mind, and I know Councillor Arroyo, you're keeping in mind, is that obviously right now D3 is a 60% person of color district, but we know that the voting skew may not quite match that, and so, you know, there's an interest in, I would say, from a kind of Voting Rights Act perspective, right, an interest in making that a district that's competitive for communities of color. And so that was the flag for me, was why, because we're shifting in your map 8-1 and 9-1 into D3, but we're also shifting out McCormick, and then we're shifting out this set of precincts. So it seems like we're ending up with more of a wash on that front, and I didn't really understand it. So I was wondering if you could speak to it more specifically.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Councillor Arroyo, would you like to address the question?
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer this, and then if Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, who represents District 7, wants to also add some nuance. District 7 already represents pieces of Dorchester. The move towards incorporating the Strand Theater, which is in those precincts that you mentioned, is part of the calculus. And so I believe it's in 13.5. But Tanya would have a better understanding where that is. We know that she's losing the MFA, or rather District 7 is losing the MFA, which is sort of a cultural institution. Returning the Strand, which used to be in District 7, back to District 7 is part of this, as well as the other demographic aspects of this. But to answer the question specifically, if you added it up, and I didn't do the calculation very quickly, but it's maybe somewhere around 7,000 people in those 3 precincts. In order to, those 3 precincts being 710, 13.5, 15.1, if you were to try to do this from a number of different calculations, so in order to get those numbers back, you would have to go up into the South End in a way that would make it incompatible to essentially do those lines in the way that we have them. So you would have to basically, you know, there's a number of different, obviously, precincts up there that you could give. So the combination doesn't have to be exactly this, but I would assume you'd be looking at 4-5, 4-4, 9-2, maybe even 9-1, all of those sort of combinations. And you end up with a District 7 that then experiences a significant loss in Black African-American population percentage. And so trying to weigh all of those things in terms of the fact that District 7's sort of history of being a Black district, being a Roxbury-based district, is part of it, but it also has always represented some portions of Dorchester, and so I think adding those 3 precincts from Dorchester is in line with that, while also giving the Strand, which is located in those precincts, back to Dorchester, since they are losing the MFA. But on top of all of that, you also asked a question about the Cape Verdean community specifically, and I think Tanya Fernandez-Anderson can give sort of a better answer on the allocation of the Cape Verdean community. But the Cape Verdean community is not like other districts where there's sort of a segregation, for lack of a better word, or a concentration of specific populations. The Cape Verdean community is concentrated in a number of precincts, not all of them within reach of each other. And so there is Cape Verdean community and a strong Cape Verdean community in the 3 precincts, 710, 13.5, 15.1, but there's also Cape Verdean community in 15.2, 15.7, and there's a few other ones. We try on my map, if you'll notice, 15.7 is put in with District 4. We try to unite the Cape Verdean community in several different places, but one of the things here specifically is attaching 7.7, 13.5, 15.1 unites the Cape Verdean community there with Cape Verdean members of the community who live further into Roxbury, and it also does a job of keeping District 7's numbers. Right now I think the exact number might be like 35.1% black. This gets them to 35.4% black. And in terms of District 3, it is true that the addition of the South End slightly increases their non-people of color number from 40 to 45%. But I think the fact that by doing that, you essentially keep District 4's racial demographics the same, you keep District 7's racial demographics the same, and you keep District 5's racial demographics almost essentially the same. It goes towards sort of our other stated goal of trying to keep our districts as racially diverse around the same proportions as possible, while also not messing up the compactness of District 7. The major issue, again, this is, I don't want to be like beating a dead horse on this, but the major issue is that when you get into Ed Flynn's district or District 2, you end up having to shed, and you cannot shed to you, and you cannot shed to District 1, and to you is District 8, just to be clear about the district. So District 8 is essentially already at its limits. District 1 is already at its limits, which only leaves District 3 and District 7, which are the directly adjacent to District 2 districts to pick up. And if you shed that much into District 7, then District 7 then has to shed a number of black precincts in neighborhoods further south. If you shed into some combination of the two, you end up splitting the South End again. And I think part of this was trying to make sure that we kept, at least for me, make sure we kept the racial demographics essentially in line, made sure that we tried to, as much as we could, unite neighborhoods. I think the strand, which used to be in District 7, going back to District 7, is not so much splitting a community as much as it's reunifying it with the part of the district that it used to be in. I think Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, who represents the area, could probably speak more in nuance to those sort of nuances. But I think from a statistical, just what the data says and what the data shows, yes, we could give back those 3 precincts to District 3, but then you would only essentially be lessening the amount of the South End that is in one district. And so, I think there's arguments to be made in a bunch of different ways, but I think that the reasoning behind that is relatively solid. And I think if Councilor Fernandez-Anderson wants to add anything else there about the Cape Verdean community or those specific precincts and or the makeup of her district, I think she certainly can. Could do better job of that than myself because it's not my district. But I do know what this map does when you start to break up the South End, and frankly, we can sort of get around it all day, but basically it's either a united South End or a continued to be fractured South End. And if you fracture the South End, by necessity, you're fracturing sort of other places. And the South End right now is fractured. And just to be sort of clear, this unites, by my count, at least 6 precincts or 7 precincts that are split between different districts into one district. And so there's obviously places where you can make some changes here or make some changes there, but I think specifically what we were aiming for with those 3 precincts was to unite the black population that was in District 7 and to keep it essentially identical to what it was, especially since most of the African-American loss and black loss in the city has been noted is in Roxbury. And so I think that was a major component, at least for me, on that. And I don't know if Councilor Fernandez-Anderson wants to add anything else to sort of the reasoning there, but that was the way to do it while still making sure that you weren't creating sort of a district that was so slender in District 3 that it didn't necessarily make sense to do it this way, where you're essentially making a neighborhood whole by our version of doing this. So that's at least my thinking.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. I think this is a valuable exercise in just figuring out our our thinking on what's what and what's where. Councillor Fernandez-Anderson, would you like to speak to this issue?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Councillor Bach, can you repeat your question again? I think I came in the middle of it.
Yes, sure.
Councillor Bach.
Sure, yeah. My question was, I was saying that in Councillor Arroyo's explanation of the district, part of the reason that it needs to get District 3 all the way over to the south end is because it's thinning in the Dorchester section, because the map is proposing moving these 3 precincts, 15-1, 13-5, and 7-10, over into your district. And I was saying on the neighborhood map, those are Dorchester precincts. And obviously, I think we were discussing in the working session the fact that there was a significant Black Dorchester and Cape Verdean population existing in District 3 right now. And so I was asking sort of for more detail on why those 3 precincts were getting shifted over, because it seems like in terms of keeping Councillor Baker's district competitive from a communities of color perspective, and also like in terms of compactness, it kind of seems like it cuts against those 2 things. So I wanted to know more detail.
Did his answer satisfy your question?
Well, I have some comments back to his answer, but I'm happy to hear if you had anything you wanted to add.
I'd like to hear them so that if it's not complete, then I can offer more.
Sure. So then I think that the things I would say and that was helpful, Councillor Arroyo, I think there's just a thing that we need to keep in mind is that much as I think the onus was on our predecessors 10 years ago to really ensure that competitive opportunity in District 5, I think that I think that everyone kind of knows that that was the defining civil rights, voting rights like feature of the map 10 years ago, was that it made District 5 newly competitive for communities of color. And it did that at some considerable cost, right? Like in the sense of, as we've discussed, the sense of Mattapan being fractured, but in order to create that opportunity. I think that similarly from a Voting Rights Act perspective, the onus is on the council in 2022 to be really sure that we are not weakening and really ideally are fortifying the competitiveness opportunity in District 3. And so while I respect, for instance, the institutional point around the Strand, I would say that like that onus on us on District 3, and then also communities of interest as kind of a principle that I think in voting rights world has status in a way that institutional points don't. I think those kind of have to come first. So that's just a flag. I agree with you that everything here is a domino effect, and so it's something like I want to look at more closely to think about like what are the movement options, but I'm just raising that as sort of the flag from my perspective on like what's the impact on District 3, and if you zoom out on this process and you think about 10 years from now, does it look like we created sufficiently competitive opportunities in as many seats as possible? Like, I want to make sure that we're in a defensible position there, so I just want to flag that.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. I'll go to Councillor Fernandez-Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I think that you'd have to be in my district to understand why the Strand is a part of District 7. I mean, it was there once, and understanding the Cape Verdean community along the corridor, it's not just about Cape Verdeans, but it's Dominicans and West Indians along that corridor that all belong where Dudley Street completes, but the precinct goes to Sumner, so that's the only option. The other thing too is if you want to unite South End, but then unite it all in District 7, then you're now making District 7 not a historically black district. You're also hurting Roxbury in order to shed District 7 to give to District 3. If you don't go to South End, you're going to go into Roxbury. So why compromise Roxbury, or to make District 3 an opportunity district at the expense of Roxbury then didn't seem to be an option. And also, I think, so reuniting the rest of Dudley Street to complete that community, that business corridor that goes all the way along to the Strand, and bringing it in. And I would say, and I would repeat what Diane Wilkerson mentioned yesterday about Cape Verdeans being Black, but having specific needs in terms of language and cultural needs that are not, that I've heard at least that would feel more that they would be met if they reunited with District 7.
Thank you. Thank you for your sharing your insights.
Just to add to, Councilor Baker, you can feel free to add to this, but I did check in with my colleagues in terms of what was okay, and I got a sense that that wasn't a bad idea from my colleagues in District 3. So I think I didn't want to be completely presumptuous. I did some homework and check in, and I did express that 710 and 13.5. I'm open to a discussion about 15.1 because after more homework, I think that 15.1 belongs with the rest of the 15. But I know that 13.5 and 710 is best with District 7.
Thank you, Councillor Fernandez-Anderson. The lights are on again. Councillor Arroyo?
Thank you. Just in response to Councillor Bach, I think obviously I think we share that goal of making sure that we're creating opportunity districts similar to 10 years ago, which is really what the goal was. And I think, you know, the council speaks to that in terms of its current diversity and makeup. As far as the idea that, you know, Mattapan was sacrificed to that goal, I would disagree with that. About 70% of Mattapan was in District 5, whereas when you look at the South End, there's no 70% of the South End in any one of these districts. And in order to do this, you would essentially have to fracture it into multiple parts. And I will just say that I represent Roslindale. That is significantly less fractured right now than the South End. And my map attempts to reunite those aspects of Roslindale. And all I have heard since literally before I ran for this seat was about how aggressively harmful Roslindale felt their splitting was. It became sort of a place where they had 4 or 5 different reps, 2 or 3 different senators. They had 3 or 4 different three councilors, because Matt O'Malley in District 6, myself, and in District 4. And so there was a level of understanding from my own personal district as to sort of the harm that splitting a district up to that degree can have in terms of splitting up a neighborhood. And when you look at the South End, it's very similar. It's split in a way that makes it so that there's not even a majority of the South End really in any one district when you do it the way it was done last time. And I think trying to rectify that while trying to protect racial demographic numbers in ways that I do believe make opportunity seats. I think District 3 is an opportunity seat. And so there are places where I think our goals are aligned, and I would look forward to further discussion about sort of what the ripple impacts are of maybe changing this here or changing that there, because I do think that that's something worth discussing, but I do know that the population sort of surge that happens if you give all of that area to one place, especially because District 2 has to shed so much and District 8 is really not capable of picking any of it up, forces a lot of movement on the southern part of this map. And so there's a lot to discuss there, but I just think that it's a little bit like a game of Jenga. When you pull one, a lot of other things fall with it, and it's just trying to figure out what's the most what's the best version of this that we can put together. And so I'm obviously open to conversation, and I appreciate the questions and sort of what you're thinking about, because it's similar to what I'm thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. Councillor Mejia?
No, thank you. I got my answers between the dialogue that occurred. Thank you.
Okay. We've been joined by Vice Chair Councillor Worrell. Do you have would you like to say any comments?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and my apologies for being late. Just here for the dialogue to see if we can continue to work together to, create opportunity districts, strengthen people of color votes, and then also just be grounded in the Voting Rights Act. Just looking forward to this conversation and dialogue between colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions, comments? Councillor Lara?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that for me, there are 2 things. I have 2 maps in front of me, and I just want, the thing that's coming up for me is that redistricting is it is a practice in ultimately securing people's electoral power and communities' electoral powers, right? And it falls in line with the provisions of the Voting Rights Act, which specifically states and speaks on racial minorities right? It's very race explicit that we're talking about racial minorities here when we talk about the Voting Rights Act. And so there are a couple of things with the two maps. I think the conversation that we've been having about Villa Victoria and the AAPI community, like I said, I worked in this community before with bringing Villa Victoria into the conversation about bringing Villa Victoria and 991 and 92 ultimately into the South End. I think that we were put in a tough position when we built the seaport and added 13,000 people into District 2. That's the reality of it. We built the seaport and put 13,000 more people into District 2. If the seaport was not there, we could very easily unify the entire South End into District 2, right? It's just like the sheer amount of people that we have in District 2 makes it so that District 2 has to shed considerably, right? But because the Voting Rights Act also calls on us to, yes, try to keep communities together, but ultimately we want to increase the diversity, sometimes it is necessary to split neighborhoods and communities to like be in alignment with the Voting Rights Act. And so the Villa Victoria, I continue to be impressed and always have been by the advocacy of CPA and the AAPI community and everything that they've been able to do. But we cannot say that Villa Victoria, that 9-1 and 9-2, Little Puerto Rico is a Chinese precinct. It's not. When you add the Asian community and the Black community in those precincts together, it still doesn't supersede the number of Hispanics and Latinos in those precincts. We can't, like, the population has gone up. I understand the connection in terms of community between the South End and Chinatown, but that is a Latino precinct. And Cathedral is they're Black. There's a Black housing, mostly Black housing development, right? That's not. So I understand the point that is being made in terms of keeping the South End and Chinatown together, but we also have to look at the realities of the numbers, right? We talk about all of the work that CPA did to build political power in District 2, and then we dump 13,000 white people into the district. It's diluted the power that they have. Moving the South End into District 3 brings the AAPI community percentage up to almost 20%, 18% to be specifically, right? And so to me, when I look at that, I'm like, okay, we've lost the plot on District 2. That's how I feel, right? It's it's someone's turn on this map to be an opportunity district. It is very obviously that it's District 3. And the reason why it's not District 2 is because we built the seaport and we put 13,000 white people into the seaport. And if we're talking about the Voting Rights Act, which is what guides the redistricting process, we speak specifically about racial minorities. I feel like we have been put in a position where, okay, we have to figure out now what to do. When we look at the AAPI community, we look at their political power, now we're like, okay, we've dumped 13,000 white people into District 2. We've significantly watered down the power that this community has built. How do we move in a way that unifies neighborhoods and continues to give them a chance to continue building the political power and possibly elect somebody that will represent the neighborhood? I think the reality, and we heard from Lydia Lowe, who testified, is that they've been organizing in District 2 for 40 years.
Yep.
And still, the only person that has ever represented District 2 has been a white man from South Boston. And now we have dumped 13,000 more white people into the district. We have to figure out how to make sure that that community maintains their political power. And keeping them in District 2 it's not actually going to be beneficial, and it doesn't work because of the sheer population numbers there, right? That's where I'm coming from. That is why I'm like, okay, this feels like the most prudent move. Villa Victoria is a Latinx district. It's very literally Puerto Rico. We can't actually make the argument that the neighborhood that has San Juan Street going through it, this is a Chinese precinct that needs to go with Chinatown. So that's the first, right? I really do think that this is the best way to give the AAPI community a chance at kind of like maintaining the political sphere of power that they have built. The other thing that I was talking about, same thing about Rachel, like Cedar Grove, and having Cedar Grove. We've heard complaints from folks from Cedar Grove as being in Dorchester. Again, 4 and 3 are Dorchester districts. I've heard people say, not here, but I think out in the public, that Cedar Grove is somehow a community of interest. The Voting Rights Act points us towards really ensuring that we're keeping communities of interest and racial minorities together. Cedar Grove is not that neighborhood. To my knowledge, am I wrong? Cedar Grove is not, they're not a group of racial minorities at Cedar Grove that are concentrated enough to say that Cedar Grove needs to stay with Dorchester. I understand that they have boundaries and that they are a community, but this is not really that big of a shift for them to go there. I heard that we were having conversations around packing. The map that I have here for District 4, that I think Councilor Murphy's map makes it so that District 4 is 96% people of color. It moves it so that District 4 is 96% people of color. Now, if you look at the Arroyo Anderson map, in which it was also said that they were packing, the percentage of black people there is only 35%. What's the total percentage? With the 3 districts from Dorchester? So we're talking about 96 and 91%, right? We're talking about, we're packing these districts. Making the historically black district 96% black, that is actually defined as packing. That will get us sued, actually, because it also removes the opportunity that we have just built into District 5. So we did this 10 years ago. District 5 was the opportunity district. We moved Mattapan in there. We did what we needed to do in order to make sure that District 5 was the opportunity district. And now we're trying to move more of Mattapan to District 4. One, it's packing all of the black people in one district, and it's moving us back from the progress that we've already made in District 5. In addition, as the District 6 councilor, this removes 1907 from my district, which is Jamaica Plain. It splits up Jamaica Plain. I have no comment about that. Good luck trying to get 1907 out of JP. Good luck trying to get anything out of JP. Breaking up JP when the neighborhood is already whole and we've worked so hard to like maintain these communities together. This splinters Jamaica Plain. Let me see, do I have anything? 1907. So I think this is more of a question of, and it might be following the Voting Rights Act, or it might just be us. What are we packing, right? Like how are we defining it? By what percentage? Does it mean that we're breaking up? Are we packing something? Like when you're taking black people from one district where it makes it more diverse and then putting them into an already predominantly black district, I think that that's very clear packing. I think that would get us sued. It goes against the Voting Rights Act, is illegal. Villa Victoria, Cedar Grove. I think that's all that I had.
Thank you.
For right now, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Bach, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make some comments related to the point about District 2 and Chinatown's political power. I think folks know that although I represent District 8, in my heart of hearts, I kind of identify with District 2 because it's the one that I grew up in. I was in Bay Village, and I was always working with the Chinese community to try to topple our South Boston councilor. That was my youth. We were never successful. We came within 100 votes for Suzanne Lee in 2011, and with apologies to my South Boston colleagues. But I think that the key thing, though, to understand about Chinatown's political power in District 2 is that what Chinatown has cultivated is the ability to be a fulcrum in such a race. So while it's true that it's not an opportunity district from the perspective of getting, for instance, like a Chinese candidate elected on the strength of that voter base, I think it's widely known that the swing of Chinatown to support our colleague, President Ed Flynn, was the deciding factor in the 2017 race. And that was a race between, and that also in the prior race, in the prior open seat race that Councillor Bill Linehan won, that again, the direction that Chinatown swang had a huge impact on who won the race. And I think the reality is that from the perspective of any community, and particularly, a protected class community of color trying to build political power while electing your own candidate is sort of the first degree thing. Being able to be the deciding factor and therefore be considered, weigh very heavily, right, in the electoral math of your district is another important thing. And so I think to the point that I agree with Councillor Lara that like, the Voting Rights Act is racially conscious because, you know, because the history in this America, and the history in America is of being racially conscious the other way, right? Of like trying to disenfranchise people of color. And that therefore, although communities of interest that are neighborhoods are important, that may come in second, right, to making sure that racial minorities have the opportunity to have strong political power. I think that that same argument kind of cuts against the way that we've been talking about the South End. Like what I take the Chinese folks who were here in the chamber yesterday to be saying is, we have a COI that's Chinatown plus the Chinese buildings in 8-1 and 9-1 that is substantial enough and should actually be an interest prioritized above the unification of the South End as a neighborhood. And I say that acknowledging that I think the South End absolutely does, to your point about Steve Fox. Like, I think every neighborhood in the city, like all else equal, would like to have a counselor that represents it. But I do think that it's not clear to me that the balance of arguments here isn't towards like splitting the South End because of the considerations of the Chinese community there, over and above keeping the COI whole. And so I just want to flag that I think that's a thing we got to weigh down there. And I don't think that that I agree that of course the council needs to also like think about 9-1 as an obviously Latino precinct. But the question of, I don't think it's been articulated a way in which 9-1 needs to swing into 7 from that perspective, right? In terms of, because of course there's like a very substantial Latino presence in these two currently, especially across Cathedral and then into Mary Ellen McCormick, which again raises the questions of, are you pulling that in? So all of that is to say, like, from my perspective, I'm obviously not here with a map, and I think like part of my homework over the weekend is to try to think about like what would be things that you would move, but I think it's worth using the working session to get some of the considerations out on the floor. And so that's one of the things I want to flag. The one other thing I wanted to flag in response to Councilor Lara's comments is just that I do think we have to, in some cases, drill down beneath the racial categories that we're provided with by the census. I think it's substantial and meaningful, right, that conversation about how do you increase the Asian vote in District 3. But I also think that it isn't necessarily obvious that, like, I think it means something electorally to unite the Vietnamese vote in Dorchester. It's not immediately obvious that that translates to the Chinese vote in the South End. And my district is the majority, the most Asian population district in the city. But a substantial number of the Asians in my district are college students who are leaving every 4 years and so are hard to build as a political base. So I just think like there are some instances here when we're talking about communities of interest and especially like racial and ethnic communities of interest where we have to drill down a little more specifically. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for your comments and your input. This is the way we need to build consensus. Councillor Lara, you had some follow-up comments.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think one of the things that with most of what Councillor Bach shared, I think that one of the issues that I run up against when I look at how to change, when we look at the Arroyo Anderson map, is that we keep the South End, right, like this community of interest to the AAPI community in Chinatown together, whether it be in District 2 or whether it be in District 3, right? We just keep the South End and those neighborhoods together in one place. Then because of what you mentioned, right, that it doesn't necessarily give them the political power in District 2 to elect someone, it also doesn't do it in the other direction, but then it weakens our ability to have districts. It weakens district, like moving it to District 2 then weakens District 3's ability to be an opportunity district. And so we keep the community of interest together, but then it doesn't actually increase the chances for either District 2 or District 3 to have someone. So it's not that I disagree specifically about like whether or not there's a connection between the South End and the AAPI community, is that like we can keep the community of interest completely together and whole, And my fear, from what I've seen in the numbers, is that it would be at the expense of having either District 2 or a District 3 then become an opportunity district because of the demographics. And so that's kind of where, that's like what I'm rubbing up against when I'm looking at this, because I'm just like, okay, we keep, they are basically, like you said, the deciding factor. I don't think that changes if we keep the South End together in District 3. I think that Chinatown still, and CPA is still the, you know, just like in my district, like Ward 20 in the South, right? It's just like there is like the political anchor of that area. I think it still remains, even if we put the South End in District 3.
Yeah. I think these are really the crux. At least there's a few particular precincts across, you know, that we really have to just keep talking about and figuring out what's the best way to go. Councillor Baker.
Madam Chair, first of all, I would say that up in Cedar Grove, you would have quite a number of veterans up there. Every street has a ton of veterans on it, which is a protected class. I think I can't help but feel like I'm targeted here. This isn't supposed to be about a person. It's about the district. I feel like my district is totally targeted here, and it feels personal. I mean, we've got limited time to do this. I personally think that, and I've stated this over and over, our goal should be to keep the districts compact the way they are and subtract and add along the edges where appropriate. That would be a lot between Eddie and myself. These maps, they had me drop in the Mary Ellen McCormick housing development, which is probably, you know, it's whatever the percentage is, it's high percentage of Latino and Black people. They have me dropping Upham's Corner, more Black people. If I grew naturally into Andrew Square, I would pick up the Ann Lynch homes, which would be, again, Latino and Black. So to send me, and to look at this and don't think that it's gerrymandering when people have thrown gerrymandering out quite a bit in this exercise here, I'm almost speechless here of what feels like is happening. What do you say? For us, about us, without us? This is happening to me, without me, because people are ganging up on me. It's what it feels like. I know it's not supposed to be personal, but it certainly does feel personal when there's maps here that keep places compact. We were joking last night, am I going to get a helicopter so I can go from one end of my district to the other end of the district? It took me like an hour to get to in town from here last night. Like, absolutely ridiculous. Another joke, I used to joke with Ross when I was dealing with prostitution and homelessness and sober houses and getting people into detox. His biggest problem was how cold was a Chardonnay. That's what this district feels like to me. The Chardonnay crowd and the people that are dealing with prostitution and addiction and homelessness, that's my district. I don't think there's much commonality in this district between the South and the North. You know what I'm saying? When I'm from the mouth of the Neponset to the mouth of the Charles. Give me a break. And we think that this is fair. This is a fair process. People are speaking like this is a good map. I feel targeted, and I can't not say it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. I think we're just putting it all out on the table. At the moment, this is what we're doing, bringing our ideas to the table and critiquing and giving feedback, and we're in a process, and it's messy, so we'll just keep going. Let's see, who's next? Councillor Bach?
Yeah, this was just, I just wanted to just a sentence back on, because what Councillor Lara said about the sort of the choices here and the difficulty, I think that's exactly why, exactly that question of like what happens if you try to keep the Chinatown folks together is the reason why I was asking Councillor Arroyo about right now, basically, the Arroyo-Anderson map, what it does is it sort of cinches in on District 3, right? That yellow bit, that's Mary Ellen McCormick getting pulled out into D2, and then that blue bit that we were talking about before getting pulled out into D7. So like in a broad sense, I feel like that's part of the choice here, is if you give those things to 2 and to 7, then the sort of no good option thing you were describing happens. But if you decide, oh, we're not gonna break up the Chinese vote up in 2, like one way of solving that from the perspective of D3 as an opportunity district is restoring those places that are currently getting bites out from 2 and 7, kind of in the middle part of the district, and also do contribute to the non-compactness. So that's really a trade-off that for me feels like it's real here. So I just wanted to flag that. Thanks.
Councillor, help me here, who is next? Councillor Mejia?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to, as we continue to go through this process, I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that, you know, the decisions that we make will impact us for 10 years, and this is really not about us. This is really about the districts and how we're going through the process. So as much as we can detach ourselves from it, because I hear Councillor Arroyo and Tanya and Councillor Anderson's map, I hear it's Councillor Murphy's map. If we could, you know, it's this person's district, so, which is easy for us to do because that's how we associate things, but I think that there are feelings that are associated with those districts, and I think that if we can detach ourselves from that and focus on what the goal is, and being mindful of the Voting Rights Act and all the work that we're trying to do here, then we can get through this in a way that doesn't feel so personalized, right? So I just want to offer us to consider that this is, I would ask my colleagues to consider that this is about what we're trying to do, and if the goal is to create as many opportunities for diversity in different districts, and if it just so happens that the district of opportunity is within one particular area, that it's not about a particular, you know, person, it's really more about what we're trying to achieve here. And I think that that might be easier for us if we can lean with that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Flaherty.
So obviously we've been discussing the Murphy map and the Arroyo Fernandez-Anderson map. Can I get a copy of the baseline map in color like this of Shane? If I don't know if you have one, or if we can get one distributed as well, just so we can sort of see what the baseline was, and then we sort of compare it with the other 2 maps. And I fully with the population breakout, and also I expect that from this process there'll probably be additional maps from colleagues coming forth. But for me, it's just helpful to obviously see it kind of in color, and then attach that to the breakdown of all the different.
We have the baseline summary. This is the baseline summary with, doesn't have a map attached to it, unfortunately. Yeah, Shane's going to get everyone a map, but there's a map to go with this.
Thank you. And just like the Arroyo and the Murphy map, I'd just like to sort of have it in that format for me.
Very good.
And
Thank
for
you.
colleagues, of course. Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez-Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess, questions for folks that may have an idea. If, for example, like if we don't reunite South End in 2 districts, then it's already split into 3 districts. So the lesser harm is to unite it into 2 districts. That, at least, we agree on. And then keeping, Chinatown together, no one is touching that. We know that the areas that are predominantly Latino, the second, I guess, highest number is Asian, and we realize that it's, it's beneath, it's like at the bottom of South End, so it needs to stay with South End. And so just taking people through, in terms of like the rationalization behind doing the lesser harm. And then when you go into Frank's district, if he's,
Can we call call them by the numbers?
all right, thank you for correcting me, because that was
Thank
going to be my next point. I thought that was part of the protocol, not to use
Use District 3.
counselors.
Yeah,
And
we're trying.
and to use District 3. So thank you for that reminder. And so we know that District 3, we can do that with District 3 because District 2 would be too difficult to do in terms of the fact that it needs to shed, in terms of the population, as well as if we go up Southie, it doesn't help D3 to become an opportunity district. If we go to the left, it hurts District 7. But if it goes into District 4, then they can share, and you can actually unite more of the 15, more of the Cape Verde community of interest, which would be the Cape Verdean community there, into District 3, and District 4 can take more of the lower Dorchester in District 3, and then if they share between each other, considering that District 4 has 10% white population and District 3 has way more, it seems like they could share within each other. But let's be very transparent. Who's willing to do that here? And so what this is also about is us getting this done on a time constraint. So it's not just, targeting anyone. It's not, for me at least, it's not targeting anyone. It's really looking at the entire map. Okay, we can't touch 9. We don't have to touch 1. We can't touch 1. We can't touch 2. We can't touch 8. And if we were to, we would have to touch everybody. We would have to completely cascade everything into each other. And so there's a way of making every single precinct, every single district, except Alston probably, except 9. There's a way of fixing this, but we would really have to shift everything around, right? We know that. So in hopes of moving forward with this conversation and just being really honest and realistic about what we're looking at is, without causing harm to District 4, how do we make District 3 an opportunity district? Without causing harm to District 7, how do we do it to District 3? We can't go up to District 2, that doesn't help the cause. So does anyone have the answer?
I think right now we're in this conversation and we haven't got the answer. That's the collaborative process we're going through right now.
Okay.
I think, and we are, we are not allowed to use projected growth. And I think for the next team, whoever comes and sits in these seats in 10 years' time, our city is going to look very different, and we're going to seriously need a lot re-precincting, and probably it wouldn't be up to the city council, but some sort of a commission or someone would have to look at the electoral map, the maps, because the rates of growth is not consistent across all districts, as we found out in District 2 last time. So the challenge will be even greater in 10 years' time. So we're trying to do the very best we can with the maps and the data and the demographics that we have right now. And I think probably at the end of this process, we will, as a committee, be making some recommendations that this is an issue that the re-precincting issue cannot be kicked down the road any further, that we need to really seriously address, because the growth, the differential rates of growth between the northern part of the city and the southern part of the city are leading us into this conundrum that we have to try and solve. So,
thank you, Madam Chair. That was rhetorical. May I finish my comment?
I beg your pardon. Yes, certainly.
I beg your pardon. I appreciate you. If this was monopoly and the pieces in the districts, the areas of interest were houses and hotels and different types of objects, and they all had different colors, black, white, brown, I think a 10-year-old would be able to make all these districts an opportunity district, is what I'm saying. A 10-year-old would be able to look at this entire map and shift it and split it evenly. And I'm serious, like there's a way. But the honest truth is that how do we do it without causing harm, without shifting too much, without, displacing people and making it an opportunity zone? So I would say we should be a little bit just more gracious with each other. I don't want to target anyone. I thought it was a good idea. If it's not a good idea, if it's not a good idea, and that's clear that some of my colleagues believe that, but again, how do we do it and do less harm without hurting District 4, without hurting District 7? And if people have that answer, then I'm open for that conversation.
I think that's the challenge that we have. Thank you. Councillor Lara?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wanted to respond or make comment about Councillor Baker's comments because I represent District 6 and my district also sprawls out all the way to the top of Dedham. Like it's like the way that District 3 is drawn here is it's not the only district in the city that is massive in that way. Like my district is also sprawled out. Obviously there's a lot for different reasons, right? There's just a lot more green space there. People are just less compact, so that's why. But the distance between is not really a consideration it's not a part of the Voting Rights Act is not a consideration that we make when making this. I understand the feeling of being targeted because we are targeting District 3, even if we are not targeting Councillor Baker, right? It's very obvious that District 3 has the most possibility of being an opportunity district here, and so we are trying to figure out how to make that happen. Unfortunately, we don't get to set goals based on what we like. Like, it would be easier, yes, to say, hey, let's just cut around the edges to make everything even and leave it at that. But we actually have a legal mandate through the Voting Rights Act to make sure that redistricting is an exercise in maintaining and building the electoral power of people who are racial minorities. So it would be easier for us to use the baseline map and just say, hey, here are the things. Let's move one precinct here to get it there, and the variation is now at 3%, and that's perfect, and I'll vote on it, but it doesn't actually meet the goals of the redistricting process. It doesn't meet the mandate that is given here. And so that is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is how do we maintain the electoral power of the Black and brown people that already exist in 7, 4, and 5, and how do we create an opportunity district? Because of the seaport, it is not going to be 2, it is 3. And so we have to figure out how to do that. And how do we do that in the way that keeps communities together? How do we do that? Like all of the things that come secondary to that are that we're trying to build the electoral political power of racial minorities here in District 3.
Thank you. Councillor Arroyo?
Yes, just really briefly. And it's been a little while, but this is actually more in conversation with statements made by Councillor Bach about sort of the pivotal part that the Chinese population, sort of Chinatown, has played in District 2. I think one of the things that, if people sort of move around on this map and try to figure this out, when you look at the sort of precincts in South Boston that border District 3, and you look at the reality that District 2 is really the crux of this entire conversation, they have to shed so much that they can only shed in 2 directions. They can shed some portions of the South End and some portions of South Boston. They can shed all of the South End, or most of the South End, really. They can't shed all of it. Or they can shed large portions of South Boston. But when you look at the South Boston precincts, and they would have to shed them, at least if it's South Boston, if you do this exercise where you keep much of the South End in District 2, then you have to shed into South Boston. There is no choice. And the only district that can pick that up is District 3. And so if we're talking about opportunity districts as a goal, and you look at the population surrounding that, look at 7-5, you're talking about 80 black people in a district of 2,041. If you look at 7-3, which is right next to 7-7, which is currently in District 3. If you look at 7-3, you have 7 black people in a district that is 2,512 people. And so when you start to get into the peripheries of South Boston, and you talk about this idea of perhaps creating 2 opportunity districts between District 2 and District 3, I would submit that in my calculus, because of what District 2 has to shed and where it has to shed it into, doing that, shifting the shedding from uniting South End under one umbrella in District 3 and just making it one umbrella of District 2, if you cut into South Boston, you are essentially doing the opposite. You may be creating an opportunity district in District 2, but you're now breaking up neighborhoods and you're creating less opportunity in District 3. And frankly, I'm not sure you can cut enough South Boston in any respect where you've sort of removed South Boston's dominance over District 2 as a voting population and as a sort of crux or anchor of where the votes are coming from. And so I totally understand sort of what Councilor Bach is saying, which is this idea that if we can make as many, which I think is a good goal, it's one we should all be aiming for, and I'm happy to hear how we get there, if there's a way to get there. If we can create 2 opportunity districts in this map, similar to the reality that additions to District 6 in the last map are largely the reason why we have diverse representation there now, and additions to District 5 in the last map are why we have the first person of color ever elected in that district. The reality is, as many opportunity districts as we can make, the better. But the crux of this comes down to the fact that District 2 is 13,500 or so over, and they have to cut from the South End, or they have to cut from South Boston. And the issue with South Boston is it can only go into District 3, and these precincts are very much dominated by their white population, and there's nothing very close there. And then I would just say, as an aside about distance, if you look at the map submitted by Aaron Murphy, you look at where it goes into 3, it goes right up into 316 and 315. 315 is Herald Street. It's the ink block. It is no closer to the southern tip of that map than Huntington Ave is on our map, which is where it ends on our map. And so the distance is very much the same. The question is just, do you send it up towards the ink block in Herald Street, which is in town? I don't know what they drink over there, but it is in town. And if you go down to 4-5 in Huntington Ave, it's the same difference, but the only real difference there is you've not united the South End. And so and if you look at the population makeup of 315 and 316, we're not talking about diverse districts or precincts there, and we're likely not talking about very diverse voting ages either. I would have to look at it in terms of what voter turnout and voting age is, but just to say that District 2 is what is sort of the domino impact on everything else.
And these are the challenges we have. I'm just remembered, and I've just been reminded that there's a staff training and that's going to start in 15 minutes. So I will take Councillor Murphy, I will take your comments, and then I think I will move to adjourn the meeting, and so that our staff can get to that training session. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. First off, I know that people are watching, and before you adjourn, if you could just share out so anyone listening, if they don't have a link to know when the meetings going forward will be, that would be helpful. But I did want to clarify something that I heard said about the District 4 breakdown, and Councillor Worrell, tell me if I'm wrong, but my current data shows me that there's a 9.1% of white, 50.6 black, 25.6 Hispanic, 5.2 Haitian, 7% of people who said they were 2 or more races, and then 2.1 other. And the way I kind of maneuvered District 4, it has 6.27, 54% black, 26.27 Hispanic, 3.88 Asian, and I can tell that that is 16-1 pulling out and combining the Little Saigon Vietnamese community along Dot Ave, 2.22, and then 7.46 other. So it's very close to the same way District 4 is broken up right now. So just wanted to share that data, which I know I shared with all of us already. But if we can compare it to current, because I have that also. Thank you. And the dates would be very helpful for people.
We have dates. We will get those dates to you as soon as possible. Thank you. In the interest of getting our staffs and everyone to the training, I move to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.